Volume 7 C91. Demiurge looked down at the corpse. So you were a woman of legend. He thought, what an absurd way to die, killed by your own friend. The archdevil held little enough pity for the dead creature, but disloyalty offended him on a deeply personal level. The friend, or what had been her, lay on the next table over. The mush of her head and brain matter lay where an intact head would have been in life. It made resurrection marginally easier if more of the corpse was present. But so far he'd raised neither of them from the dead, or undeath as it were. Instead, because of their strength, and their diverse physical tendencies, he'd been conducting experiments with mana flow. Tear magic is so close to what it was like in Yggdrasil, but there it just had none of these properties. It just worked. Here though? The thought was a blend of exhilaration and intimidation. I've learned so much from Remedios. But I'm missing something. Even if our Lord doesn't use this, the possible applications are boundless. Demiurge began to pace beside the preserved corpses. Maybe. He looked down at the body of Lake Hughes. Maybe the base form matters more than I thought. What if I added another step? And what if? He looked toward the door of his lab. Somewhere out there, the Draconic Queen, a rare wild magic user, was slowly reaching the conclusion that she had no future unless it was under the Allfather's thumb. Wild magic. Maybe the key. He considered it more, and more. But then gave it further thought. I need more souls though. More followers. Her kingdom just doesn't have enough. But then, the beast men do. I suppose one more trip would be worthwhile. And I get the feeling the Draconic Queen won't be feeling particularly merciful anytime soon. Perhaps we can see how strong her wild magic can be. Do what we did with Arch and her companions. The thoughts and plans spun on in the Archdevil's mind, for possibilities that seemed to go on and on without end. So can you really beat him? Brain asked the question of his traveling companion the following morning. It's that or a fate worse than death. Zeshi answered him when they were well on the road again. I don't want Zeshi to die. Layali chimed in. For the moment she rode on the front of Zeshi's horse and leaned back against the chest of the heterochromatic half-elf. So you're not allowed to, she insisted with the kind of seriousness that only a small girl could muster. Understood. Zeshi answered and patted the top of Layali's head. I'll just have to win then. And if you win the throne, what then? Brain asked. The breeze blew on, and the long dangling hair of Zeshi's was joined by the rest of her long strands. The sun was beaming down with only the most distant of clouds which carried the southern storms to the far north. The horses clip-clopped along, and for a fair time, Zeshi didn't say anything. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, Brain said, and bringing his hand to his mouth, he coughed into it, clearing his throat and hoping to have cleared an awkward moment. I don't know. Zeshi finally stated, I just don't. I was supposed to hand it over to the slain theocracy like a present, something they could use to crush the last resistance of the Elf Kingdom. But I can't do that now, and I won't. With my father dead and the power of the Empire, there'd be nothing to stop the theocracy from overrunning the whole region. Things like what happened with my brother, and those others. They'd never end. I don't want that. But I don't know how to rule anything. How would you like it? Zeshi asked him. Like the Empire? The throne? Brain pointed at his chest and looked at her half open-mouthed. You're not serious. I'm not serious. You know a lot more than me. I'm just a warrior. I fight, and that's all. I can't do a damn thing. I don't want a throne. If I win, I'll give it to the next most powerful survivor. Maybe I'll offer to guarantee their spot on it. Of course. If somebody beats me, and offers to make me the Empress, that's different. That's something you really want? Brain asked, to just fight and have strong children? I never really thought of anything else, not really. Zeshi answered, when you're a scripture member they really only want you to do two things, fight and screw. So it's all they taught me. Brain inched his horse closer to Zeshi so that they were side by side. Is that why they took you from your mother? He asked her, and it was her turn to drop her jaw. I never thought of that. By the balls of the gods. She lowered her eyes to just watch the road pass beneath her horse. They said it was for my own good, that she was getting too old and I had too many special needs as a. Her eyes stung as the realization hit her. Bastards. They wanted me as a. And they were always trying to get me to lie with Senna. They took me away from my mother, let her die without me. So they could raise me for that? I really was a card. To be used and discarded when they were done. She lost herself in her own thoughts. Did Raymond know? No, he couldn't have known that much, plus I heard him talk about me. Whatever else he's done, he does care about me, he wouldn't have kept that from me. You're just like my mother, in the end, Layali said and put her little hands over She's not human. Not a person. Just a tool. I'm sorry, really sorry. I didn't like it either. The little girl's tiny voice was utterly sincere, and she twisted herself halfway round to swing her arm around She's slender frame to give the elder half-elf a hug. They were silent for a while. She, with great delicacy, put her hand on top of Layali's head and stroked it a few times. She couldn't say how it felt for the little former slave to actually pity the pinnacle of power. But when she felt her heart tear in half at Brain's unexpected and unimagined observation, the little embrace put a few stitches at the tear. Maybe we don't have to give her up. The trump card thought, playing her cards close to her chest as they rode onward to the north, and without thinking about it, both Brain and She spurred their horses at the same time, and chased after the northern horizon on the endless road ahead. Volume 7 C92. Damn it. The Elf King bellowed and raged. He was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling. It wasn't exhaustion, but fury that drove him to punch the ground again. Somehow that whelp was behind this. I know she was. My other cunts are too useless. I should have broken that trash in, breeding ready or not. He howled his rage and kicked his foot against the fireplace. The stones shattered into powder, foam formed around his mouth as his fury rose to ever greater heights. Trash nation. Trash people. Everything is trash. They should lick the dirt from my boots to show their gratitude that I let them serve me at all. He stalked around from place to place and recalled the feeling of magic, and the familiar array of creatures that appeared out of nowhere on his grounds. Gate magic. And undead minions. The same as that time. His anger hadn't abated, but the stirring of the memory stopped his destructive rampage. Around the estate there were broken walls with Elf King-sized holes through them, wooden chips and shattered stone. And not even any of his guards remained. This is how they rescued those hostages. So many did the same thing after that. Force me to fight somewhere because of my pathetic servants, then swoop in and take them before fighting me. If I ever find this mysterious game guide, I'll torture them to death. I know the Nines are behind this. That whelp, she mentioned a Nine-Zool gown. It must be the same. The Elf King growled and stomped around his designated area. Soon enough the next area will open. Then, in the arena, new hostages, new prizes, new mates to make into mothers. Maybe that stock will enable me to take this world. Then at last I can live as I should. It's strange, Draudillan spoke privately to herself as she strode down the long hall of Nazareth behind the maid. When I was a captive of that monster, I wanted two things. To keep my people safe and to avoid being violated like they were. Now here I am. I'm not a prisoner in fact, but I could be made so at any time. But I'm worried about neither what will happen to my people, nor that the Allfather would act like the Elf King. What a difference context makes. By simply speaking as a guest in the beginning and having his tacit agreement in calling it hospitality, the exact same situation was flipped entirely on its head. And yet despite all of that, my heart is still pounding the way it was when that elf leveled his arrow at me. She rubbed her forehead and followed patiently behind the maid. Can you tell me anything about the Allfather? Draudillan asked. What is he like in private? What can I expect? How should I behave? Draudillan asked, and the fire-haired maid spun on her heel and giggled. Oh, he's going to assault you? Oh yes. He's going to be so rough with you? Oh, you poor powerless. Lupus Regina cracked up and began to laugh uproariously at the Queen's paling face. I'm sorry, Lupus Regina waved her hand back and forth, fanning herself as if the laughter heated her up too much. You just reminded me of somebody I met once that pulled similar faces. No, nothing like that will happen. Queen Draudillan stopped in her tracks. Is that true? Yes, you have nothing to worry about, as long as you do three things, Queen Draudillan. The maid held up 3 fingers between the two of them. First, she lowered one finger. Show that you will treat all beings the same. He loves us all very much. If you want to survive, show that you'll make a world we can be safe and happy in. Second, she lowered another finger. Submit yourself to his will. He is no mere King Su. He is a living god. Master of the 41, this world is his, and there are only two types of entities in it. Those who will help to hand it to him, and the dead over which we dread, or feast. She licked her lips and her animalistic hunger became more obvious. Dylan took a step back by sheer instinct, and the maid's demeanor shifted back to the quiet, demure servant it was a mere moment ago. And third, she lowered her final finger, work hard. So like albedo. Monsters under the rule of a king who can command monsters, who can steal under the nose of the elf king, who can slaughter armies or save nations. No matter how clever I am, I can't win if I'm on any side but his. The truth albedo dangled out so politely was driven home with this simple maid revealing a shadow of her monstrous self. Then lead on, Dylan said, straightening her back and stiffening her resolve. You humans. Never tire of you know. Always such a worried lot, always frantic. Lupus Regina put her hands behind her head as she led the way. It's kinda funny, my sister, Solution is the one I get along with the best on account of we always tell the total truth. It's not cause we're nice, we're not. It's cause that hurts you folk the most, and yeah hide from it, even though yeah need it far more than yeah know. Face the truth, or get crushed by it. Lupus Regina giggled as she recalled the way Lacuse's skull was crushed against the stone, and the broken, shattered souls of the three survivors of the now wilted rose. So, what are you going in there to do anyway, or is that none of a little maid's business? Lupus Regina asked when they reached the king's bedroom. Add my kingdom to his. Unconditionally, even if I must go with it. The queen answered as Lupus Regina knocked. The draconic queen could hear the noise of voices, but not what was being said, though a moment later words allow her and came through clearly enough. Lupus Regina opened the door and closed it behind the queen. That was easy. But I wonder where those fallen petals landed. Probably right where they were supposed to. She told herself and went back to her duties again. Sulky? Shawla? Mazur? Acolyte Janus asked of the darkened room. Why is it so dark in here? He asked. One of the few pleasant things about the harsh training of priests in the slain theocracy, was that at least you never had to fear being in the dark for long. There was always somebody in the monastic school who was reading something, even into the wee hours of the morning. While a storm raged on outside, with howling winds and rolling rumbles of thunder that caused trees to bend over almost halfway, the indoors was always dry, and warm. Relatively, and lit. But now there was darkness. Come on. He told himself, then said it. Come on, this isn't funny. We're not first years. Say something, light a candle, we've got studying to do and the head priest's note said he'd be here in an hour. Tall and slender, Acolyte Janus was one of the more graceful students, and generally prone to some degree of sloppiness when it came to being on time, a fact that annoyed most of his peers. Look, I know I'm late. Again, but there was a good reason this time. There's no need to prank me, he shouted into the big, dark room. Hiding under their desks waiting to scare me or something. Jackasses. He grumbled, the noise of a wet slap like his foot hit a puddle resounded under his feet. Come on. I don't want to mop in here. He grumbled as he flailed in the dark in search of a sconce on the wall. He found it quickly enough and fumbled with his hand, tracing his fingers over the bronze outline until he knew which way it went, and followed it up to find the soft feel of the wax candle. You're late. A voice said in the dark, a woman's voice. We were supposed to be gone an hour ago. Maris, or is that Avis? I'm sorry. I was. Janus held his finger up to the candle wick. Spark, he cast the utility spell and a tiny spark jumped from his fingertip to the wick and cast the dancing yellow light around him. He opened his mouth to scream, nothing came out. Strewn about the room were corpses, blood still dripping from their bodies where they lay slumped over. The dripping blood pooling on the stone floor, at least 20 of them. Janus fell to the floor and began to back away. No. Asked, what the fuck? What the fucking fuck? He fell to panting until his body stopped going backwards. His hands felt wet, as did the back of his pants. He raised his hands to look at them. His palms were red, and the blood that stained them, cold. He craned his neck up to find himself looking at a giant of a woman. Lightning cracked against the sky outside, and two more figures, twins, came in through the windows. We got the others, Evil Mountain. One of the pair said. Evil Mountain, you were supposed to be done. Why is he alive? The other asked. He was late. The mountain of a woman muttered. She then shoved her leg forward, giving him a swift kick and sending him skittering through the blood. She reached behind her and took out a large hammer from off of her back. "Why? For God's sake. Why?" Janice cried out. "I can't die here. I was supposed to become a scripture member, and a cardinal. I was supposed to be the one who stayed at the top of this nation. I can't die here." He screamed inside his head, and screamed out loud a moment later as he rolled over and tried to scramble through the blood-slick stones, splashing droplets about as he made to flee for his life. Gagran's voice cast hatred like archers cast arrows and slingers cast stones. "Ask your gods when you meet them," she roared with her half-mad eyes alight brighter than the candlelight or the lightning itself, and brought the hammer down on the last acolyte's skull, smashing it to mush just as he elicited one last scream. With that, Gagran reached up, lit her thumb and forefinger, and then closed them over the last candle, leaving the slain corpses for others to discover. "Come on, the slain theocracy has a lot of priests, so this is only the beginning. We don't want to waste time while it's still easy," Gagran said, and with that, Tia and Tina fell in behind her, heading toward the door the acolyte had come in through. "Right. Evil Mountain. Right," the twins uttered, and left the slaughter at their backs. Volume 7 C93. She crouched down over Layali as the fire crackled nearby, and covered her with a small blanket. The bouncing flames seemed to dance to music only they could hear, spurred on by Brain's continued poking at the embers. Sparks jumped up as if they feared his touch and died in the open air after a fraction of a second's life, and a light breeze blew at his blue hair, caressing his skin and adding comfort to the dark of night. "She's asleep," she said after returning to him. "I know," Brain replied to her without looking in her direction. "How? You weren't checking her and she's not snoring?" she asked, furrowing her brow at him. "You wouldn't have come over here if she weren't," Brain replied. "Now spill it. We've been on the road for days, and galloping for half of it and you've barely said 10 words. Give me whatever speech you've been comprising in your head and get it over with." She stiffened and blinked, and then her shoulders drooped a little. "Damn it. I can kick your ass from here to our winter still, and yet somehow you see through me like I'm a clean glass window." Brain shrugged off the praise. "You're an innocent, it's that simple. But I don't know exactly what you were going to say, so say it." "I don't like the idea of leaving Layali somewhere." She spat the words out in haste, and Brain never stopped looking into the flames to address her. "And I don't want her to end up wandering the road alone at her age, or being eaten by a monster. So, what do you suggest?" he asked pointedly. "Even if you stay with me and we can, between the two of us, mostly you," he acknowledged with a begrudging shrug, "can handle anything the world throws at us. What then? Can you teach her anything other than fighting?" "No. I can read and write. I can do simple numbers. But I never had much of a head for the rest and they never bothered to teach me anything more." She clasped her hands together and rested them between her knees. "I can read and write some, but again, just like you, fighting is all I know. Say we teach her to fight, and that's all she knows how to do. Even with that ability of hers. Or worse, because of it. What's going to happen to her? She could become an adventurer, or a soldier. And just bear wound after wound after wound. I've never seen a talent like hers. And it makes me scared for her. At least if I take a sword to the brain, my suffering will end. I don't know what can kill that girl. So, a safer life. Get her a merchant spot, an education, a farm," Brain insisted. Back and forth they went, getting lost in their discussion until she stopped speaking. She looked past the blue-haired swordsman. "Layali. Why are you up? Put that down, don't play with that." Brain turned around to look. Layali was awake and had Brain's sword in hand. She drew it from the sheath, and alarm swept over her face. "Layali. What's wrong?" Brain shouted. "Don't." The firelight cast its glow over her body and made it abundantly clear something was wrong. "Brain. She. What's happening? Help me. Please," she asked. Her hand was shaking as if she were fighting against the blade. "I'm not doing this," she screamed as it was drawn across her throat. "No. I don't wanna go. I don't wanna go." She howled as red began to run away from her throat as it pumped out. She and Brain reached Layali at almost the same moment. The blade fell away from nerveless fingers and Brain kicked it away as he caught her fall. Don't worry. You'll be fine, he shouted. He knew the truth, she will be fine. But we can't cover this up. He cursed as Zeshi slapped a hand over the wound. Squeeze it tight, Brain snapped. I can fix it. But Layali, he said as he looked into her eyes, this is going to hurt. Her eyes were full of fear as he rose away from her, leaving Zeshi to cradle her back and holding the little half-elf against her. It'll be fine. Zeshi promised. Brain knows what to do, he always does. Just be okay, just know that you'll be okay. Zeshi promised as Layali spasmed and shook. I don't like the cold, Layali whispered. Then Brain was at her side with needle and sutures in hand. A little field craft. You'll be good as new with a little food. Just be patient and bear the stings. Zeshi, hold her head back, I need her taut and not moving. Zeshi grabbed Layali beneath the chin and forced the girl's head to tilt as Brain instructed, and he bit down on his tongue while he began to work. This time his fingers moved with smooth, practiced ease. Owie. It hurts. It hurts a lot. I don't like this, Layali said and kicked her little legs about while she clung to Zeshi's arm as tightly as she could. Blessedly, it did not have to be endured for long. I'd rather not burn there, so. Layali, lie down on your back and look up at the sky and don't move till morning. What happened? Zeshi asked. Why did you do that? What were you thinking? Zeshi demanded of the girl, and Layali's eyes pooled over, blurring the young girl's view of her elder companion. I wasn't. I didn't. I heard you all talking, and I thought, I can fight. I wanted to pick up the sword, try some poses like you and Brain do. And then the sword. The sword made me do it. She sniffled and reached up to wipe her nose, only for Zeshi to bat the girl's hand away with a slap and then wipe it for her. No moving, Zeshi insisted, and Layali lowered her arm to her side on the cool grass. She then reached for the dropped blade. Stop, Brain snapped and kicked it away, allowing it to tumble off into the darkness. What was that? Zeshi snapped. She just told you. The sword made her do it. Brain quipped and pointed after it. That was a cursed item. Bullshit. You didn't die, you didn't injure yourself. Zeshi glared, and I don't own any cursed items. You should know as well as I do, Zeshi, that the more focused you make a spell, the more powerful it becomes. The same goes for curses. I'm not a half-elf, or any kind of elf, so I'm guessing it wasn't going to work on me at all. But maybe they made it cursed only to half-elves. Or maybe they made it cursed only to the descendants of the Elf King, to make it even more potent. You definitely qualify, and she might too. Brain pointed down at the limp Layali. Either way, that was meant for you, Brain insisted, and Zeshi felt her fading pulse roar back again. But I got this from Senna. He's my friend. He wouldn't try to have me killed like this. He wouldn't. I know him, Zeshi yelled at Brain, but he could see the way her body shook. It was just denial. The ugly truth was clear in her eyes. She just couldn't face it. I'm sorry. But this is why I told you not to do this. Don't reach out to old friends, old contacts, former comrades. What you did looks a lot like treason. And I'd say they decided they had to get rid of you. And if they didn't have anyone strong enough to kill you in person, your own hands would be good enough, Brain said, and crouching down, he took a little herbal water and held it to Layali's lips. Have some of this, the sleep will help you heal. He promised. Her eyes were still bright as the stars above, and she gave a quiet little nod to him and allowed it to carry her to sleep. He's my friend. He's my closest friend in the Black Scripture except maybe Raymond. We fought together, drank together, and other than Raymond, he was the only one who would come see me in the treasury. Raymond lies to me. My country steals my mother away from me. My friends. My friend tries to kill me. What do I have left? She asked him point blank as the weight of it all hit her. I'm here. Layali is here, Brain said and led her back to the flames. He rubbed her shaking hand and, placing the other on her back, he gently sat her down. If Layali didn't have that talent, she'd already be dead, and I nearly got her killed, just because I didn't listen. Because I just... fuck. I screwed everything up. I screw everything up. Why can't I do a damn thing right? She looked at him through glistening eyes. Why are you even still with a screw-up like me? Being around people I like is pretty rare, so I figured I should enjoy it while it lasts. Brain tried to smile at her, Layali, she's not your fault, they tried to kill you, she got caught in the middle. Zeshi accepted the words he offered, then added, you've been a wonderful companion. Thank you. You have more patience than I could bear. I'm sorry I've been such a burden. You haven't been, and don't forget you did save Layali's life before. Don't be so hard on yourself, Brain said and put a hand on her shoulder. He gave it a squeeze and for a few seconds she said nothing. Brain. She finally spoke. Yes. He replied to her. Don't say anything, I don't want to think right now. Just to feel something else, she said, and before he could say anything, her lips were locked on his and he felt her pressing him into the grass, her fingers flying faster than the eye could follow over his clothing and hers alike. Volume 7 C94. Experience is a great teacher. And over the course of his wanderings, Brain had spent his hard-won coin on professionals of many stripes, from those who knew the way of the sword, even if it meant only to learn one single technique, to those who mastered dancing on their backs. It was the latter whom Brain drew knowledge from when Zeshi kissed him. She was forceful, almost violent, and tears were stinging her eyes when she did it. What she felt was not unknown, and what she wanted, what she sought in his arms, was clear as day. So he returned the kiss, he let his hands work her clothing as hers did his, and when she grasped his manhood, he was already prepared for her. There was no talking, not with words when she wrapped her legs around him and sought release. But her naivete, her innocence, was obvious again. Without a word, his lips spoke to her. Without a noise, his tongue instructed her. Without a swordsman's grip, he held her. And Zeshi proved herself to be a quick study and an enthusiastic student as the minutes compiled themselves into hours and the slick sweat of their bodies commingled. Right there, yes, just like that, Zeshi gasped as Brain's sword calloused finger teased at her clit. Her body rose and fell against him, her eyes shut tight against the world as bliss engulfed her and that now familiar shaking overtook her and caused her toes to curl and her eyes to roll back into her head as her back arched to meet him. She couldn't speak when his lips captured hers in a kiss and their tongues dueled in a battle with neither a winner nor loser, and she felt his body's iron within. Even having never been with anyone before, the warriors of the Black Scripture were a rough lot and not shy with their words. She had word of mouth enough to know what was happening, and in her fevered, ravenous state she embraced it, tightening her inner muscles around his shaft and clinging to him as if he were a lifeline and she was near to drowning. She arched herself one more time and gushed her desire over his flesh, heard him groan and felt his arms tighten around her body. The scent of their mingled desires filled her nostrils as she felt him erupt within her. And they collapsed. She landed on him, their chests both heaving. It was he who pulled her down onto him, so that she was on top and they were still joined at the hips. For perhaps a minute, heavy breathing was the only thing close to language that they had, and Zeshi felt weaker than she ever had, allowing herself to rest entirely on his chest. His hand went down her back to rest lightly on her ass, and a little trace of a smile formed on her lips. So, are you a gentleman to let me rest on top? Or is that the pervert's way of getting to grab my ass again? Brain laughed through his heavy breathing and said, both works. But are you okay? Are we okay? He asked and turned his head to look up at her when she rose over him just a little. Yeah, we are. I wasn't planning that, but knowing that Senna tried to have me killed? Zeshi looked away. I never expected that out of him. To be fair, maybe he didn't. Maybe what you requested never even reached him. You didn't go to him but to someone else. Maybe they set it up. Brain suggested it tentatively. She could see on his face, the way his eyes moved away, that he wasn't sure about that and was just trying to make her feel better. It made her heart melt just a little, but even if he didn't believe his own words, to Zeshi? That makes sense. The Aganti don't work for the Black. They work for Dominic. Raymond had words with him over me before. What was it I heard him shout? The good of humanity includes what is good for her, and if I have to say it again, I won't use words. Nobody short of her mother had ever argued on her behalf before, and it secured her absolute trust in Raymond for the next 20 years and some. I could easily see Dominic, maybe the others too, deciding to get rid of me if they thought I was betraying them. She considered it, and found it more than probable. So, us? Brain asked. Are we different people? Zeshi asked, and Brain cocked his head at her. So yes, we're fine. You didn't do anything I didn't want. She smirked a little, very much the opposite actually. Practice makes perfect. He wore that boyish, cocky little smile, and a tiny part of it infuriated her, but in a good way that left her feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Playful. Pervert, she said and crossed her arms. She felt his manhood inside her begin to stiffen. What am I going to do with you? Asked. She began rocking her hips back and forth, and then her arms came out and pinned him at the shoulders. Her hair tumbled away off either side of her back. Let's play a game, she whispered as she began to work his flesh with hers. The one who finishes first makes camp for the next 2 nights, she suggested. I'll take that bet, he said, and played dirty to win over the course of another hour until she clamped her teeth down on his shoulder to keep back her screams as he claimed victory, and finished within only seconds later. He felt her bloody him by clawing at his back and breaking the skin on his shoulder, and didn't care. I win, she said when they finally separated themselves, and she stood up to stretch, and reached down to poke at the slowly dying fire. The orange glow briefly roared to life and illuminated her glorious form. The black and white hair swayed a little in the breeze, particularly the long single strand that always danced even when there was nothing to stir it. Her breasts were far from large, but they were supple, like ripe peaches. Her long, slender legs were far more powerful than they appeared, and her half-elven ears twitched still from the attention he'd paid to them. I don't feel like I lost that, Brain said as he rolled over and rested his ear against his palm and his elbow on the ground. I know enough to know that if a man has sex, he never feels like he's lost. She smirked. I suppose I'll make camp for the next 2 days, a deal's a deal. And when we get to town. She looked over at Layali. The little half-elf still slept on. The bandage around her throat would require an explanation. We'll say goodbye to her. If the theocracy learns that their attempt failed, and I stand out, so they'll learn it for sure. She might get, no, she will get caught up in another attempt. I don't want that. Me neither. But Layali will object, Brain pointed out. I know. She answered, and crouching near the fire, she hugged herself. Things were simpler before I left. Welcome to the world. It's a mess out here, Brain said while he put his clothes back on. She looked over at him from where she crouched before seating herself. What? No sage advice? No, it gets easier or anything? She demanded. No, nothing. And if you want it easy, stay alone. That's what I've always done. As soon as you add more to the mix, things get messy. Pleasantly sometimes, he said, his eyes roaming her bare skin again, and that boyish, cocky, infuriating smirk returning and causing her to remember her present nudity. Gah. Pervert, she snapped and held out her hand. He laughed, picked up her clothing, and handed it to her. She snatched it away and put her back to him to get dressed, though when he sat beside the fire with her, she didn't move away. Instead they watched the flame until it turned to ash, and the small half-elven girl, until she woke up with the rising sun.